Hello, my name is Marlène Daut, and I'm a professor of African Diaspora and American Studies at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. The occasion for us coming together today is the Battle of Vertières, the famous battle that ended the Haitian War of Independence. And so I'd like to just take us to the scene for a moment before stepping back to understand the significance of this day in Haitian history. Capois la mort. François Capois was a formerly enslaved man. His nickname La Mort means essentially the deadly one, or literally the death. Capois la Mort, as he was called, had fought with bravery in the definitive battle at Vertières that caused the city of Cap-Haïtien to fall into the hands of the indigenous army. Having been given charge of the avant-garde on the night between the 17th and 18th of November, Capois was ordered to advance upon the city of Cap and to not stop until he had breached its gates. At first light, General Augustin Clervaux ordered the attack to begin, and bullets began flying in every direction. The storm of artillery and the advance of Capois, along with the descent of Generals Christophe and Romain into the surrounding area, forced Rochambeau to exit the city with his cavalry. They fled to the blockhouse of Vertières, which was a kind of square tower constructed in stone that could only be accessed by ladder. Blockhouses of this sort were meant to act as small forts and places of refuge where troops who were under fire and outnumbered like Rochambeau's could safely wait for reinforcements. The French were now surrounded by the indigenous army on all sides. Dessalines thus ordered Capois to take his troops to capture the Charrier plantation in the heart of Vertières, an ideal vantage point from which to attack the peak where the blockhouse was located. Capois had to pass through a treacherous ravine in order to arrive at the heights of Charrier, and he encountered such heavy opposition from French troops along the way that the 7th, 9th, and 14th demi-brigades accompanying him began to lose courage. "We must, brave men," he said to them, "make ourselves masters of this mountaintop. The success of the army depends on us. En avant," he cried out. The French did not waver, however, and the 9th Demi-Brigade experienced numerous losses. But Capois, surrounded by the dead bodies of his comrades, was nevertheless determined. He mounted his horse and launched himself at the fort and did not stop fighting even when his horse was shot out from under him. A back and forth of bullets ensued, but assisted by the demi-brigades led by Generals Dessalines, Daut, Clervaux, Gabart, and Vernet, the indigenous army ultimately set fire to the fort, causing the ammunition to explode. The fire allowed Capois' troops to storm Rochambeau's men with bullets, effectively leaving them with no defense. The remaining French soldiers were in the end forced to retreat. Rochambeau understood that this failed battle had effectively ended the expedition. Christophe had already conquered a neighboring mountaintop near Vigy, established his battery there, and they were now ready to overtake the city of Cap-Haïtien. But of course, revolutions are neither won nor lost in a single day, and they are not made with single battles either. So let us peel back the layers and go back to an earlier time when the French began to establish their plantation economy, their plantocracy that would be driven by the forced labor of nearly 1 million enslaved Africans. They established this colony on the western third of the island of Saint-Domingue, which the Spanish had renamed Hispaniola. The Treaty of Ryswick in 1697 officially ceded this part of the island to France. The colonists of Saint-Domingue practiced some of the cruelest slave punishments in the Atlantic world, including burning and severing limbs and ears and other body parts. And these events these kinds of punishments directly led to what would come to be called the Haitian Revolution, which of course refers to the collection of slave revolts and military strikes that began in 1791, and that resulted in the eventual abolition of slavery in this French colony and its subsequent independence and rebirth in 1804 into the first independent Black nation of the American hemisphere, Haiti. Now, the French colony of Saint-Domingue is, of course, known as a slave colony, but there were also different social structures in place that helped to create the combustion that eventually became the Haitian Revolution. At the top of this kind of social and economic pyramid, you had what were called the Grands Blancs, and these were the plantation owners. You had Petits Blancs functionaries, like lawyers and doctors. And then you had the gens de couleur libre, the freed or free people of color, who could often themselves either be functionaries or be plantation owners. So you had this kind of a contradictory society that wasn't strictly divided along the lines of color, even though color prejudice was one of the main motives and driving forces in keeping slavery alive there, and also in preventing the free people of color from ascending to higher social positions. And then, of course, at the bottom of the pyramid, you had enslaved Africans and Creoles, those people of color who were enslaved but born in the colony itself. A Martinican jurist and naturalist and historian named Moreau de Saint-Méry came to live in the colony of Saint-Domingue, and he created a 128-part racial system, a caste system, if you will, to describe all the different kinds of people of color who lived in the colony of Saint-Domingue. And this is just to give you a sense of the way that racialized discourses that we recognize today as fundamental parts of racism and white supremacy, how they sort of began to infiltrate Saint-Dominguean society, and by 1797 had become so hard and fast that they're basically printed in books, and people are essentially adhering to stereotypes and prejudices in order to keep the enslaved people subjugated, and also to keep the free people of color, despite how wealthy some of them could be, in an inferior position to all of the white inhabitants of the colony. Enslaved people, though the Haitian Revolution doesn't formally begin until 1791, they resisted all along the way. They sometimes broke tools, they sometimes devastated the crops, and in this very famous instance, we had a fugitive enslaved person named Macandal, who used a vast poisonous network, if you will, in order to sow the seeds of rebellion. And this came to a height in 1757. He ended up being arrested and executed in front of the church in Cap Français. And local legend has it that at the very moment that he was going to be burned at the stake, he transformed himself into a mosquito and flew away. And so this idea of the Macandal will become a resonant one during the Haitian Revolution, which also occurs with a yellow fever outbreak, yellow fever being transmitted by mosquitoes. So the idea that the spirit of Macandal was still alive. So a natural disaster that was also a sort of supernatural disaster. And so while the enslaved Africans are in a natural state of war, to use one philosopher Montesquieu's words, with the plantation owners, the enslavers, the free people of color are also in almost continuous conflict, especially from the 1760s and 1770s forward. One particular free man of color, Vincent Auger, and his comrade Jean-Baptiste Chavannes, decided to corral a little less than 200 free men of color in October of 1790 to kind of agitate for the rights they saw white French people demanding back at home for themselves: liberty and equality. They wanted these things for themselves in the colony of Saint-Domingue. They had never been enslaved. They were from families that were free people of color for generations, and they didn't see why they should be denied things like representation and equality before the law. While the white colonists had other ideas, they continued to defy French law in denying them the rights that had been legislated back in revolutionary France. The French Revolution had begun in 1789. And when Auger and Chauvin were eventually captured along with their supporters, they were given a sentence of death. And so what you're reading on your screen there is from the official declaration of what should happen to them, so that they should have all of their arms and legs and bones broken, and then they should be put on a scaffold and their heads should be cut off and put on pikes. And this was done as a warning, both to other free people of color and to enslaved people who would occasionally also rise up in rebellion in isolated instances on the plantations. Well, it all came to a head in August of 1791, in the night, the wee hours of the morning. Boukman Dadi, with a female religious leader named Cécile Fatima, led what is considered now to be a kind of gathering of Vauduisans in the woods in Bois Caïman, where they exhorted their followers to rebel against white planters. They said, the God of the white man calls him to commit crimes. Our God asks only good works of us, but this God who is so good orders revenge. He will direct our hands. He will aid us. Throw away the image of the God of the whites who thirsts for our tears and listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the heart of all of us. Within a few days, multiple plantations were on fire, white colonists were fleeing in every direction, and the Haitian Revolution had begun in earnest. A little bit after this, a new leader would emerge. There had been several leaders, along with Boukman Dadi, who was killed early on, who had sort of risen to prominent roles. But by August of 1793, the French have sent multiple series of commissioners to the island to try to quell the rebellion. They're trying to figure out how they can stop it. And Toussaint Louverture rises to the position of authority and power with which we know him to have been endowed and possessed today, which makes him one of the most famous of the revolutionary heroes. And at his famous speech of Camp Tourelle, he told the enslaved fighters of the revolution, brothers and friends, I have undertaken vengeance. I want liberty and equality to reign in Santo Domingo. I work to bring them into existence. Unite yourselves to us, brothers, and fight with us for the same cause. And San Domingo, Santo Domingo, San Domingue were often interchangeable terms depending on who was writing it, whether they were British or US or French writers kind of transcribing a person's speech or writing articles about the revolution. In August of 1793, two of the commissioners, Santonax and Paul Vérel, understood that they had no choice if they wanted to preserve the colony for France, but to abolish slavery. They were busy fighting the British who had come to invade. They were fighting the Spanish, who of course were still in possession of the eastern side of the island. Well, this would change with the declaration that slavery was ended, and it would be made official by the National Convention in Paris in February of 1794. The French Jacobin government also understood that slavery was contrary to the principles of republicanism that they were espousing, and that there was simply not going to be an easier way to quell the rebellion. Well, it worked for a little time. There were still skirmishes and especially internecine fighting between two of the revolution's most famous leaders, Toussaint Louverture and André Rigaud. But it essentially brings Toussaint Louverture back over to the side of France. The Treaty of Bâle is struck in 1795 with Spain, which cedes the entire island to France. Toussaint Louverture ascends to the role of Governor General, And he decides to begin thinking about what kinds of laws can be put in place to govern Saint-Domingue and to keep it profitable. He creates a constitution and he sends it to Napoleon Bonaparte, who had risen to power in France, had abolished the Directory government that had replaced the Jacobin government, had established a consulate with himself as first consul, Napoleon did, and he didn't quite like Toussaint Louverture's kind of initiative to create this constitution that, while it declared that everyone in Saint-Domingue would remain free in French forever, it also declared that Toussaint Louverture was Governor General for life. And so what did Napoleon Bonaparte do? He sent his brother-in-law, Charles-Emmanuel Victor Leclerc, to Saint-Domingue with an expedition of initially between 20 to 30,000 troops. They got there in January of 1802. By February 1802, they're trying to gain land, specifically at the port of Cap Français, but who is in charge of this port? None other than General Henri Christophe. And when Leclerc petitions him to enter the city, he says, "I'm sorry, I cannot do that. I have the honor of informing you that I cannot deliver these forts and posts over which I have been given command before having received an order from the Governor General Toussaint Louverture, from whom I derive my authority." Christophe sent his aide-de-camp over to Santo Domingo, where on the eastern side of the island, where Toussaint Louverture was for the moment. But he issued this warning: if you realize these threats, I will resist as an officer general must, and you will only enter the city of Cap after having watched it reduced to ashes. And even upon these ashes, I will fight you. The French persist, and so what does he do? He has the city of Cap burned, and this is what Toussaint Louverture will see as he rides his horse back into town. Ardent fighting is going to ensue, but more tragically for Toussaint Louverture, in June of 1802, he will be captured, arrested, deported to France, and will never live to see the Haitian independence that his efforts set the stage for. Toussaint Louverture was very aware that the treatment he received after he had gone home to his plantation in Ennery, after he had recognized the authority of Captain General Leclerc on the strength of Leclerc's promise that he would not bring slavery back to Saint-Domingue, he was arrested anyway. He complained about it during his entire long imprisonment in the Fort de Joux Mountains, which lasted from August of 1802 when he arrived until April of 1803, when he was found dead by a guard in his prison cell in France. Before that, he wrote a memoir, several different versions of which exist, and he presented it to General Caffarelli, who was one of Napoleon's main men. He said, "Without a doubt, I owe this treatment to my color, but my color, has it ever prevented me from serving my country with diligence and devotion? Arbitrarily arrested without anyone explaining or telling me why, all of my assets seized, my entire family ravished, my papers confiscated and kept from me, shipped out and sent over here nude like an earthworm, with the most atrocious of calumnies having been spread about me. Is that not to cut a person's legs and then order him to walk? Is it not to bury a man alive?" And Toussaint Louverture would never see his children and family again. And the article up there from the Times of London is reporting on his horrible and sad death. The image you're looking at below is from Ducasse Vandeness's Toussaint, Vandenesse Ducasse rather's Toussaint au Fort de Joux, his play. Back in the colony of Saint-Domingue, things are not going so well for the former generals of the French army. So Christophe and Dessalines, along with most of the famous generals, including Augustin Clervaux, had for a time defected to the French army. So while Toussaint Louverture went into retirement and went home, Christophe had struck an agreement with Leclerc. He made him promise, once again, never to bring back slavery, because the Treaty of Amiens between France and England had ceded the island of Martinique back to France, and on Martinique, there was still slavery. And this was, of course, contrary to the 1794 law. But a new government was in place, and the revolutionaries needed reassurances. Well, those reassurances soon ran out, and Christophe and Dessalines and the vast majority of the other generals would soon turn against the French army to establish the indigenous army. The French were not having any of this. While Leclerc had succumbed to yellow fever in November of 1802, his successor, and who had been his second in command, former governor of the colony himself, Rochambeau, decided to use a tactic of terror that would only make the Haitian revolutionaries even more certain that what they needed to do was to unite together, because there's several factions still existed among those who would ultimately band together to defeat the French. In April of 1803, Rochambeau sent dogs after the revolutionaries to devour them. And this image that you're looking at here is from Marcus Rainsford's famous 1805 History of the Revolution, an historical account of the Black Empire of Haiti. This is just a bust of Toussaint Louverture commemorating him in France that I wanted to show you. Before we get to the spirit of Toussaint is still alive, of course, because as he's boarding his ship, he says this apocryphal statement, you know, you've gotten rid of me, but the roots of liberty are still here and they run strong and deep. And that turned out to be true. At the Congress of Arcahaie, which took place in May of 1803, Dessalines is effectively able to rally the various factions in the colony together. And this is the moment when he is famously said to have ripped the white out of the tricolor flag to create the red and blue, which is, of course, today Haiti's flag. And you're also seeing in Madsen Montpremier's painting a depiction of Catherine Flan, who is said to have sewed those tattered shreds of the red and the blue together to create this flag, the standard of liberty and independence. And from this moment forward, the notion of independence is in the minds of the revolutionaries. It's not just ensuring that slavery never comes back. And of course, slavery had been reestablished in Guadeloupe in August of 1802 through violent means. And so they knew that they were fighting for their lives. And so liberty or death turned into independence or death. Which brings us to the Battle of Vertières, which took place on the night of November 17th to 18th. And when the revolutionaries, as I mentioned, were victorious, this taught Rochambeau that he would not be able to hold on to Cap Haïtien. And if he couldn't hold on to the city of Cap, he knew that he'd essentially lost the war. Yellow fever had ravished his ranks. There were plenty of desertions, especially on the Polish legion that Napoleon had sent to assist the French military. And he strikes, Rochambeau does, an armistice agreement to leave the colony within 10 days. Rochambeau surrendered effectively. And on November 30th, Dessalines officially assumed control of Cap Français, soon to be rebaptized Cap Haïtien, and declared eternal war against the French colonists. This is a picture of Guillaume Lethière's Serment des Ancêtres, in which he depicts Dessalines and Pétion swearing allegiance over a tablet that says liberty and equality. And we know that on January 1st, 1804, Dessalines gives a famous speech and reading of the Haitian Declaration of Independence, which will subsequently circulate all around the world. And in this declaration, he famously declares that slavery is forever ended and that any French people who remain on the island who'd like to live in harmony under Haitian laws are welcome to do so, but for the rest, there will be an eternal and never-ending war, and that Haitians would rather die than to have slavery return to their shores. This is the statue of General Jean-Jacques Dessalines that lines the Champ de Mars in Port-au-Prince, and thank you very much. I would like to end there with a reminder that in April of 1804, Dessalines gave a famous speech in which he declared, "I have avenged America. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope our paths will cross soon.